It was barely 5:30 in the morning when she slipped out from under the thin blanket, careful not to wake the baby. The apartment was still dark, a quiet that only existed before the world stirred. Her knees cracked as she stood. She moved like someone whose body had long since learned the price of rushing. She had 2 hours to make it across the city on 2 buses and a train, and still arrived looking composed, clean, and ready. She didn't own a stroller. She carried her baby with an old cloth wrap, tight against her chest, shifting the weight from hip to hip as she moved through the morning routine. The kettle sputtered to life, but there was no time for tea. There was only powdered formula, a bottle still warm from last night's feeding, and a sink full of dishes she had no time to finish. She chose her best clothes, though best was generous. The shirt was slightly wrinkled, the pants a bit too tight from postpartum swelling, but everything was clean. That was the only standard she could still meet. She checked the email again before leaving. The job interview was at 9 a.m., reception would open at 8. She had planned to be there by 7:30 to show eagerness, to not lose her place in line. It was one of those generic building-wide recruiting days where they saw dozens of candidates in one shot. But for her, this wasn't just an opportunity. It was all she had left. Her rent was overdue, formula was running low, and the temporary job she had cleaning offices at night had ended without notice. She had called the agency. They never picked up. She had knocked on her neighbor's door to ask if she could watch the baby. The woman said no before she finished her sentence. She had texted the baby's father. No response. Just a little blue check mark. So she wrapped her son close to her body, tucked a bottle and a cloth diaper into her old handbag, and left without any other option. The bus was late. The second one broke down halfway. The train was packed, and people looked at her like she was a burden. Some rolled their eyes when the baby cried. She whispered to him to hold on just a little longer. At the station, she took the stairs because the elevator was out of service. Her back ached with every step, but her feet kept moving. By the time she reached the building lobby, her shirt was damp with sweat, her hair clung to her temples, and the baby had started fussing again. Still, she walked to the reception desk, smiled with as much strength as she had left, and signed her name on the interview list. They told her to wait, so she waited. The lobby was cold with air conditioning that made her arms prickle. There were no seats left, so she stood at first. Then she found a corner near a vending machine and sat on the floor, knees up, trying to balance the baby who wouldn't stop squirming. An hour passed, then 2. She asked if she could step out for a second to change him, and was met with a half nod from a distracted assistant who never looked up from her screen. The bathroom had no changing table, so she did what she had learned to do. She made do. She laid her scarf on the sink counter, held her baby with one hand, and changed him with the other, praying no one would walk in. She used the last of the wet wipes and folded the used diaper into a plastic bag she always kept in her purse. When she returned to the lobby, her name still hadn't been called. At some point, she stopped checking the time. It no longer mattered. Her stomach growled. She had only eaten a piece of bread that morning, saving the rest of what she had for her son. He had finally fallen asleep in her arms, head resting against her collarbone, mouth slightly open, breath warm against her skin. She didn't dare move. She didn't dare disturb the one moment of peace he had found all day. Around her, other applicants paced, chatted, checked their phones, laughed too loudly. No one looked at her. It was as if she wasn't there, or worse, as if she didn't belong. Then, finally, someone called her name. It was soft, almost an afterthought. She stood slowly, adjusting the baby without waking him. Her legs were stiff from the hours on the floor. She brushed the dust off her pants, wiped the corners of her mouth with the back of her hand, and straightened her posture as best she could. She walked toward the interview room with quiet determination, each step heavy but precise. This was her chance. This was the door. All she had to do was walk through it. Inside, the air was even colder. The man behind the desk looked up from a file and saw her. His eyes moved from her face to the baby, then to the frayed strap of her purse, then back to her face again. His expression didn't change, but the pause was long enough to be loud, and in that silence, everything started to unravel. She stood in front of his desk, holding the baby with both arms, trying to balance between not looking too eager and not seeming too desperate, though the truth was that she was both. The baby had started to stir, his face twitching in small movements, the early signs of a cry. She gently rocked him with the practiced rhythm of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The manager's eyes didn't move with hers. He didn't smile, didn't greet her. He sat back in his chair, let out a slow breath, and leaned his elbow on the table like he had already decided something long before she ever walked in. She introduced herself. Her voice came out too soft at first, but she cleared her throat and tried again. She spoke about her experience, her willingness to work any shift, her fast learning, her dedication. She said all the things she had practiced the night before, whispering the words to herself while feeding her son in the dark, hoping they'd come out with strength when it mattered. But here, in this room, with the baby now fully awake and starting to squirm again, her words felt like they evaporated the moment they left her lips. The man finally spoke. He asked if she had someone to watch the baby during work hours. She said not at the moment, but she was already looking. She explained the situation calmly, hoping he'd understand. She said it wouldn't be an issue for long, that she just needed a chance to start again. His eyes moved to the baby, now letting out small cries. The manager didn't respond right away. He reached for a pen on the desk, clicked it twice, then said the words she would carry with her for a long time. "This isn't the place for a desperate single mother." That's what he said. Not unkindly, not loudly, just plainly, like a fact. Like something she should have already known. She froze. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. It was like her body was trying to hold everything inside at once, her pride, her grief, her anger, her panic. It all swelled and pressed against her ribs, but she stayed still. The baby whimpered, and she adjusted him against her shoulder. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she nodded. She said, "Thank you for your time." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook. She turned around and walked out of the room. She didn't look back. The door closed behind her with a soft click. She walked through the hallway in silence, past the same people who had ignored her earlier. Some glanced up as she passed, maybe sensing something in her expression, maybe not. The receptionist didn't even lift her head. Outside, the sun had risen high, casting sharp light across the street. The city was already in full motion, people rushing, horns blaring, the world moving without noticing that something inside her had just split open. She kept walking. Her feet moved automatically, one foot then the other. Down the steps, across the pavement, onto the next block. She didn't know where she was going yet, but she couldn't stop. If she stopped, she might start crying. And if she started crying, she wasn't sure she would be able to stop. It wasn't just the rejection. She had faced those before. It was the way it had been said, not as a comment on her resume or her skills, but as a judgment about her existence. As if being a mother, being a single mother, was a disqualifier from being worth a job, a chance, a moment of dignity. As if holding her baby had already made her invisible to opportunity. She walked for blocks, cutting through narrow streets, passing cafes she couldn't afford, stores she couldn't enter. Her body felt heavy, but the weight wasn't just the child on her hip. It was the years behind her, the unpaid bills, the closed doors, the silence from people who used to pick up the phone. She found a low wall near a construction site and sat down, her back against the sun-warmed bricks. She loosened the cloth wrap a little so the baby could breathe more freely. He looked up at her, eyes wide and calm, unaware of everything. She touched his cheek and whispered, "It's okay, we'll figure it out." The words came out empty, more a ritual than a promise. but even saying them out loud made her feel slightly more anchored. She closed her eyes and let her head fall back against the wall. She stayed there a long time, letting the noise of the street wash over her, not thinking, not planning, just sitting. The baby started to doze off again, his small body soft and warm against hers. Eventually, she stood up again. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew she had to keep moving. If not for herself, then for him. Because no one else would. Because the world had made it clear she was on her own. And because somewhere, deep inside the exhaustion, there was still something stubborn in her that refused to be erased by one more closed door. She didn't stop walking for long. The street where she sat was already becoming crowded, the noise of traffic growing louder as the sun rose higher and the morning turned into early afternoon. Her back ached from sitting on the uneven concrete, and her arms felt tight from holding her baby so close for so many hours. But she stood again because stopping wasn't a luxury she had ever known. There was no one waiting for her at home. No warm meal, no open arms. Just a rented room that barely counted as a shelter and a growing sense that even it could be taken from her any day now. The little money she had left would only stretch so far, and the job she had hoped for was now a shut door she wasn't allowed to knock on again. So she did the only thing she knew how to do. She started looking for another door. She walked the streets like a stranger in her own city. Each block looked the same, each building too clean, too closed, too distant. She held a stack of resumes. In a folder she had kept from better days, pages that had become soft at the corners from being handled so many times. She had printed them weeks ago when she still had ink and a sense of hope. Now the paper smelled faintly of old milk. A few had small stains near the edges where her bag had leaked. Still, she held them like they were gold, because in her world, they were. She stopped at a small grocery store, not the kind with automatic doors and glossy shelves, but one with crates of fruit outside and faded posters in the window. She asked the man sweeping the front if they needed help. He didn't even stop to look at her, just shook his head. She tried again, 2 doors down, at a beauty salon. The woman at the counter said they weren't hiring, then added, without being asked, that they needed someone presentable if they were. That word sank into her like a knife. Presentable. She walked out without answering. Block after block, she offered herself like someone selling something they didn't believe was worth much anymore. She stopped at restaurants, stores, kiosks. At a laundromat, she handed a resume to a young man folding towels behind the glass. He took it, glanced at the baby, and handed it back. He said she should come back when she had her life more together. She didn't react. She didn't have room left for anger, only movement. She found a bench near a bus stop and sat to rest. Her feet were beginning to swell inside shoes that had already given up their shape. She hadn't eaten all day. The baby stirred and fussed in her arms, and she reached into her bag for the bottle, but it was nearly empty. She tilted it, gave him what little was left, and whispered quiet words to soothe him. Her voice cracked. She didn't remember when she last drank water. After a while, she stood again. There was no time to rest, not really. She walked down a narrow alley between 2 buildings and found a small bakery with a handwritten sign in the window. She pushed the door open, and a soft bell rang above her head. A woman behind the counter looked up, tired but kind. She asked if they needed help, even part-time, even just to clean. The woman hesitated, looked at the baby, then said she was sorry. They didn't have space, but she offered a piece of bread from behind the counter quietly, like it was a secret. She took it, nodded in gratitude, and stepped outside. She broke it in half and held the first piece to her mouth, but something stopped her. She gave it to her son instead. Tiny pieces softened in her hand before pressing them gently to his mouth. He chewed slowly, his eyes still sleepy from the heat and hunger. She found a shaded corner and leaned against the wall to breastfeed. She was tired of hiding, tired of worrying who might see, who might judge. Her body no longer belonged to shame. It belonged to survival, and in that moment, survival meant making sure he slept with a full belly, even if her own stomach felt like an empty pit. She rested there, one hand cradling his head, the other wiping sweat from her brow. A man walked by and muttered something under his breath. She didn't hear it clearly. She didn't care. It was late afternoon now, and the sun had begun to slip, behind the buildings, casting long shadows across the street. She had walked for miles. Her muscles ached. Her knees felt unsteady, but still, she kept going. Not because she believed something better was around the next corner. That belief had faded hours ago. She kept walking because standing still meant defeat. Because if she didn't keep moving, her baby wouldn't eat tomorrow, and there was no one else in the world who would carry that burden for her. She paused. At a corner, looked up at a small sign for a cleaning service office above a shop. She walked in, climbed the stairs, and knocked. A woman answered. She asked again, any openings, any shift, any location. The woman looked her up and down and said, "We're only taking women with referrals." She had none. So the door stayed shut. She left, walked another block, then another. The baby was heavy now, asleep again, his head damp against her chest. She passed a park, thought for a second about sitting on the bench inside, letting her feet breathe, but she didn't. She couldn't. She had a few resumes left, a few more places to ask, a few more doors that might still be open before the sun disappeared completely. She kept moving, not because she had strength, but because she had no other choice. She made it to the far end of the avenue before her body began to shut down. It happened slowly, like a dimming light she didn't notice until it was almost gone. Her steps grew smaller, her eyes struggled to focus. The world around her kept moving. People crossing streets, talking into phones, sipping coffee under awnings. While she fought to keep her legs steady, one in front of the other, the baby had fallen into a deep sleep, his weight now pressing into her shoulder like a stone. Her back was soaked, her hands were numb. But her mind still whispered, just one more store, just one more try. The next place she approached was a pharmacy. She had no resume left, but she stepped inside anyway, desperate enough now to ask even without a plan. A young clerk was restocking boxes behind the counter. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her throat felt like sand. She tried again. The boy looked up and frowned. Before she could finish the question, her vision swam, then narrowed, and the floor tilted beneath her. She reached out for the wall. Her lips formed the words, "Just give me 1 minute, please." But her body didn't wait. Her knees buckled, and she sank to the floor, cradling the baby instinctively as she went down. Everything after that happened, in fragments. A gasp from somewhere nearby, someone calling for help. The sliding sound of cardboard boxes being pushed aside. She was on her side now, the baby still wrapped tightly against her chest, awake and crying. Her breath came in shallow bursts. A shadow leaned over her, a hand touched her shoulder, and a voice said, Hey, are you okay? Can you hear me?" She blinked slowly, her eyelids heavy. She nodded, or thought she did. Her hand moved toward her bag, instinctively checking if the formula bottle was still there. It was. That was all that mattered in that second. A woman appeared, older, maybe in her 50s, wearing a worn apron and holding a bottle of water. She crouched beside her and said softly, "Here, drink." The yapas. Mother took a small sip. It tasted like metal and relief. She tried to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. The woman asked if she needed an ambulance. She shook her head slowly. "No, just tired," she said, "just tired." The boy from the pharmacy knelt down beside her now too, awkward and unsure. He offered to help her sit up. She nodded and shifted, wincing at the stabbing pain in her back. The baby clung to her now, sensing something was wrong. She kissed the top of his head, whispering, "We're okay, we're okay, we're okay." It sounded like a lie, but it was the only thing she knew how to say. The woman sat beside her on the curb and asked if she had anywhere to go. She hesitated. Then she shook her head. Not really. There was silence after that. A long, quiet pause while the world around them went on. Oblivious. No one else stopped. A man stepped over them without. Looking down, a car honked in the distance. Someone laughed behind a glass storefront. But on that piece of sidewalk, there was stillness. The woman reached into her pocket and pulled out a granola bar, handed it over without comment. The mother took it and held it in her hand, unsure if she should eat it or save it for later. She hadn't eaten in almost 24 hours, but she gave it to her son first. The older woman asked her name. She gave it. Then she asked if she had family in the city. The mother shook her head again. Then she looked down, and for the first time that day, her eyes welled. She didn't sob. She didn't break open. It was quieter than that. Just a single tear sliding down her cheek, then another as she whispered, "I'm just trying to find something, anything. I can clean, I can carry, I can do anything. I just can't go home with nothing again." The woman listened, her face calm. She didn't offer pity. She didn't offer advice. She just said softly, "I know." Then she stood up and said she had to go back to work. She asked if the mother would be okay. She nodded, said yes, thanked her. She said it 3 times. Thank you, thank you, thank you. When the woman walked away, the mother stayed seated on the sidewalk. Her body felt like it had been scraped hollow. She rested her forehead against her knees and let the baby sleep in her arms. The sun was starting to lower now, casting long shadows across the pavement. She closed her eyes and counted her breaths. Each one felt like work. Each one was a decision to stay. She didn't know what she was waiting for anymore. A break, a sign, a reason. But nothing came, just the sound of cars and footsteps and life going on around her. She was just another figure on the edge of the frame, too quiet for anyone to notice. And still, she didn't stop. She wouldn't stop, because stopping meant the world had won. She stayed on the sidewalk until the sky began to change. The harsh blue of afternoon softened into a dull gray, then orange, then the deep, slow fade of evening. The baby was still against her chest, quiet now, his breathing shallow and rhythmic. She hadn't moved in over an hour. Her legs tingled from being folded too long. Her arms had gone numb from holding his weight. But she didn't dare stand yet. It wasn't just exhaustion anymore. It was the fear that if she got up too fast, she might fall again, that if she moved forward and nothing changed, she might not have it in her to try again tomorrow. But then something shifted, not around her, inside. She thought about the look on her son's face earlier when she fed him the last of the bread, how he had smiled in that tiny, wordless way children do when they trust everything will be okay. And something in that memory pulled her up gently, like a hand under her ribs. She stood slowly, adjusted the cloth wrap, and whispered, "Come on, baby, one more try." The city looked different in the evening, softer somehow. The stores that had ignored her were closing. The streets emptied a little. And in that slowing down, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. A handwritten sign in the window of a small, dimly lit restaurant tucked between a hardware store and a shuttered boutique. It wasn't polished. The sign wasn't even straight. Just a wrinkled piece of paper taped to the glass. It read, "Looking for help. No experience necessary. Ask inside." She stared at the sign for a long time. Part of her didn't believe it. Another part didn't want to. Hope had become too painful to carry. But her legs moved forward anyway. She stepped through the door and into a narrow space filled with the smell of warm oil and old tile. A woman behind the counter looked up. She was middle-aged, hair pulled back, apron stained from the day. Her eyes met the mother's, then dropped to the sleeping baby. The mother didn't speak right away. She couldn't. Her throat had closed up again. She stood there, holding everything in her body together like a person made of string, praying nothing would unravel. The woman didn't rush her. She set down the tray she was holding and said calmly, "Can I help you?" The mother nodded. Then, the words came all at once, soft but steady. "I saw the sign. I'm looking for work. I've done kitchen prep, dishwashing, cleaning. I can learn anything. I have my baby with me, but he's quiet, I promise. I just need someone to give me a chance." The woman didn't answer right away. She came out from behind the counter and stood in front of her, hands on her hips, eyes steady. She studied her, the way someone studies a storm cloud, not with fear, but with understanding. She asked one question, "Are you willing to start now?" The mother's mouth fell open. She blinked once, then nodded. "Yes." "Right now." The woman gestured toward the back where the kitchen door swung open and closed with the rhythm of a tired dinner rush. She said, "You can start with dishes. If the baby needs to be close, there's space in the back. It's not much, but it's clean. You can put him down there." The mother tried to answer, but her voice broke. Her lips trembled. She swallowed hard and whispered thank you. The woman didn't react to the tears that came next. She just nodded and turned, calling out toward the back for someone to bring an extra apron. In the kitchen, everything smelled like heat and noise and life. Steam rose from pots. Plates clattered. No one stared at her. No one questioned her. They just pointed her toward the sink and showed her where the gloves were. She set her baby down in a soft corner, near a stack of clean linens, wrapped him in the scarf she had worn all day and kissed the top of his head. He was already asleep again. She washed plates for hours. The water was too hot, the gloves too thin, but she didn't stop. Her arms hurt. Her back screamed, but she didn't stop. Because for the first time in days, maybe weeks, she was standing inside a place that had said yes. When the last plate was rinsed and the kitchen quieted, she sat on an overturned bucket near the back door and looked at her son. He stirred slightly, turned his head, and sighed. She reached over and touched his hand. It was still warm, still safe, still here, and then it hit her. Not a victory, not joy, something deeper. The realization that survival wasn't always loud or proud. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it looked like a small room, a dish sink, a stranger's kindness, and a few dollars at the end of the day. Sometimes it was just the simple truth that she had gotten here for him. Not because the world helped her, but because she refused to stop walking. And in that moment, sitting in the corner of a kitchen, soaked in sweat, holding nothing but a quiet baby and a day's worth of exhaustion, she finally let herself cry. Not from shame, but from the weight she had carried, from how far she had come, from how close she had come to giving up, and how somehow she hadn't. She was still here, and that had to mean something.